You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. And we're going to be talking to Jim. And Jim, it's good to have you back in the studio. Of course, our first artist for Arts Transmission working with the Sittingbourne and Kemsley Light Railway.
Hello, Daniel, and all BRFM listeners. Yeah, it's very nice to be back up here on the Windy Ridge.
Well, Jim, I was hoping perhaps to sort of introduce our listeners to it, or anyone who's not quite sure about the project, just a little bit about, your part of the project and Arts Transmission and how we sort of started working with the railway.
Yeah, well, I was contacted by yourself and Laura and Louise from Arts Transmission, and asked to come in and work with the local group of the Sittingbourne and Kemsley Light Railway, who run this wonderful heritage railway operation from Kemsley down up into the heart of Sittingbourne. And I was asked to come in as a visiting sound artist and work with the volunteers there. So I'll just talk a bit about the beginnings of that, Daniel, if that's okay?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, well, let's talk about first impressions. Well, everybody probably knows the first day at a new school impression, and that's probably where it hit me. I first went along in December, and the SKLR were running what are called their Santa Specials. And this is where they lay on a steam train, themed with all sorts of Christmas wonders, glowing lights, there's Santa Claus and grottos and stuff. And of course, it was my first experience as a sound artist of coming to the SKLR and meeting all these, the sounds of steam and all the associated sounds of the area and all the mechanics of running the thing. So I must say, although I sort of had a few ideas, I think it's always good to go into a project with a few ideas, I didn't really know what to expect. And almost as soon as I got there, I was entranced by the workings of this railway. It suddenly struck me how complicated it was. I could say I was almost intimidated, Daniel, I realised very, very quickly, probably in about 3.5 seconds, that I had a hell of a lot to learn, and I must say, although I'd done a little bit of research, my knowledge of spark arresters and the other peculiarities of running a steam railway were completely beyond me.
Yeah, I was going to say, you talking about that, what was quite nice, even for me, although I was well aware of the interview, and I'd been interviewing Paul probably since we launched. Coming on for 8 years, I've been interviewing Paul.
Paul Best, yeah.
But it was completely different experience actually going there, not as a visitor, because I'd gone there as a visitor, or I'd gone there just to interview Paul for perhaps an hour or so, but actually going there with you, and we were spending the day there on a working day, even I learnt a lot from the railway, I think.
Yeah, well, it suddenly, I suppose one way to characterise it is like the difference between being a sort of casual visitor to suddenly being on this mission where you have to produce work that both involves the community of workers and also involves all the sort of sounds. And I think for me what was very special about it is that the SKLR is such a large operation with so many limbs, so to speak. It's divided up into all these departments, and it's just the very scope of it, the scale of it. There's so many things to sort of consider. And that's just talking about the workings of the railway. And then there's the actual environment, because when you think about it, they've got this almost 2 miles of railway line that they run and maintain all the way from Sittingbourne up into Kemsley. And that passes through the Milton Park there. And, what other stuff's on the way, Daniel, there? You know it as well as me, I think, now.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting railway, because it goes from almost industrial to country park and back into industrial, so it's a whole journey. And now the new roads been built over the top, they even go right under their own bridge. Yeah, I mean, it
works in so many different experiences along the way in a very short space of time. A 20-minute ride, you go past compacting recycling areas and brickworks and the cement works that sadly is closing down now. There's all the giant supermarkets at the Sittingbourne end. And
well, that's what I was going to say. It's an end that's changed in real recent years, because technically both ends were in almost a paper mill, and within the last few years that's completely changed to become a retail park and a supermarket. So the railway has completely changed at the Sittingbourne end.
Yeah, and I mean, it's I guess it's sort of an interesting sort of time for Sittingbourne to see all this sort of development going on. I mean, it must be mingled with a bit of sadness, I would guess, for some of the sort of residents, because isn't it true that they had to demolish some Sittingbourne landmarks in the process of progress?
Yes, yeah, it completely changed the look. And probably one of the most landmarks that people were used to was there was a water tower in the middle at Sittingbourne. And of course, that when the supermarket was built, so yeah, that whole landscape changed there.
Yeah, I sometimes wish we had the technology to leave the water where it was and just remove the tower, but I guess that's in the future. It'd be a nice sort of memory, just a tower made of water. Anyway, I digress. So, obviously, coming to this railway, I mean, what really struck me about the volunteers, people who work there, was just this level of commitment and dedication. I mean, for instance, a lot of the volunteers, as well as people who live locally and who've returned to the Sittingbourne and Sheppey area and who come and work on the railway regularly, there's people who come from, you know, all around the country, basically, you know, up from London and up from Brighton, and they take these long journeys and, you know, time out of their lives to come and dedicate themselves to what is a volunteer railway, you know. I mean, they donate their time. People aren't paid for doing this, you know. Now, I suppose something else, when I came there, I sort of had a slight idea that as a heritage railway, I don't know a lot about heritage railways, but I probably had a slightly sort of twee idea that it would be a bit like a sort of, you know, sort of, when I look at Chessington Zoo, and I don't know much about the railway there, but I had this idea, oh, you know, you've got these like little trains and it's all very sort of, you know, it's all very relaxed and you just kind of chug a few trains along a track. And this was a major shock when I sort of discovered that the SKLR is actually, and forgive my ignorance here, but the SKLR is run like a proper railway. And, you know, almost immediately I could see why, because they're moving members of the public back and forth on these trains, and of course safety issues are absolutely paramount. So everyone who works on the railway it's essentially, it's like working for the National Railway, you know, or any of the railway companies, Virgin, whatever. Everyone knows all the regulations, the rules, they're briefed on safety, there's track inspections. So suddenly I could see, you know, that sinking feeling when you suddenly think, oh my God, what have I gotten into here? This is like really deep, you know, and I suddenly realised that the scope and the scale of what I'd have to do was really quite enormous. So that, you know, that was daunting, but, you know, that I was there to rise to the occasion, really.
Yeah, and sort of talking about that, you saying about sort of the rules and regulations, although they follow all that. What was nice, I found at the railway, was they weren't bogged down with that. I think that was one of the things we found. You know, it was all there and they all knew their rules, but it didn't. They didn't sort of live by them in a way that ruined the enjoyment or the excitement or the passion they had for the railway.
No, absolutely, and it's, you know, this is part of the stuff I was trying to sort of process at first, and was this it's almost like a contradiction between those two modes, because underpinning the whole thing is this amazing dedication and professionalism, and these are people who, you know, they really know their stuff. They, you know, they really know about tracks and restoring engines and all the other aspects as well, whether it's, you're talking about the gardens and just sort of looking after oil and diesels and whatnot. There's so many different aspects there, you know, building all the carriages and stuff, all this sort of skill. But at the same time, you come down, it's like a playground. You know, when you're actually here, everyone is like, oh, hi, and it's like really relaxed, and, you know, you're trying to sort of figure out what is going on here, these kind of professional people, and it's like, you know, you're suddenly given the freedom, the keys to the city. You can wander around this, like, oh, go and have a look around, you kind of think, oh, I better not go near that carriage. If this is like, if I was in the sort of science museum or somewhere, and I sort of touched an exhibit, you know, 10 guards would probably come out and carry me off screaming, you know. But the SKLR, oh, get on board, have a look, climb up there, you know, sort of jump on those logs if you want, mate. They might fall down on you, you know, but that's your risk, you know. So they very much allow you to come in and use your common sense and play around, which is a great feeling of freedom. I absolutely just loved it.
And Jim, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, I suppose, how you kind of adapted and worked with the railway, and that was kind of an important part of the project. I think that flexibility was there, that, you know, the railway would get used to you and you would get used to the railway and work with them, and the project could develop from there.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that, Daniel. Yeah, I mean, I knew straight away I'd have to spend a fair bit of time at the railway to become familiar. I mean, I think originally we were suggesting to do sort of 5 or 6 visits, and what I found when I went down there, because I spoke about this before, but at risk of repeating myself, what they do is they have weekends at the SKLR when they're open to the public and they run their sort of trains, but on Wednesdays they have a sort of a closed day when they do all the maintenance, and lots of volunteers come down and work on the gardens, on the carriages, on the tracks, all the maintenance stuff you need to do to keep a railway running. And it's on those days we were allowed to come down, which was great, because it's like being put inside, you know, seeing the inside workings of the sort of project, which is kind of privileged access. Is really fantastic. And from going down there, I suppose it's the biggest shock I got is that in terms of producing artworks with the volunteers and things, I just realised almost immediately, hang on a sec, you know, this isn't like, oh, we'll come down and we'll kind of drink a few cups of tea and hang out, and maybe we'll sort of tap a wheel and tighten a spanner and ride the trains around a little bit. Oh, no, it's not like that at all, you know. People come down there and everyone's working flat out. There's wheelbarrows racing across the site. There's diesel trains running up the tracks with cement and sleepers. There's people hammering on bits of metal, reshaping and recycling things. And what I'm saying is it's a really, really busy working place. I mean, you experienced that, Daniel, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it was nice. Everyone knew their job and what they had to get on with, and it was quite nice, you know, rather than, you know, you might have expected you'd get there all at a set time and everyone would stand around and they'd tell everyone what they needed to do on that day, but it wasn't like that. Everyone knew what they had to do and they all had their own tasks, and it just worked, and that was kind of nice. So when you got there, everything was happening and everyone was getting on with what they needed to do.
Yeah, well, I sometimes like to sit in, when I can get to gardens, I like to sit in gardens and watch ants. And I'm one of those people who can watch ants for hours. I mean, I'm endlessly fascinated. And probably the same with bees and things, but ants are in a sort of concentration, so it's quite easy to see. And as we know with ants, there's always a sort of queen there directing things. And this is one of the mysteries of the SKLR there, because there are no queen ants at the SKLR. There's just like worker ants. But somehow there seems to be this pattern of working and behaviour that makes total sense. Nobody steps on anyone's toes, and they all seem to know instinctively what to do. But of course, for me coming and doing sound pieces, like one of my initial ideas was to come in and produce, working from their experiences and stories, produce some experimental sort of dramas. I thought it'd be quite nice, and working in Sounds of the Railways. And I think you'd mentioned this to me, Daniel, that it might be a slightly sort of exotic idea, really, given the way things are. And I honestly, you were quite right. I hadn't realised just how busy everyone is down there. And like I say, they have very little time. They come down on this Wednesday and everything has to be done, and the railway has to be repaired and up and running. It's a huge task for volunteers, and no wonder they're always looking for more, hint hint. But in that time, I just realised, how am I going to sort of pull people away from this work they're doing? You know, it's like, essentially it'd be like going into a sort of busy factory somewhere and pulling everyone off their machines and saying, come here and do my art project and do this, come and help me with this, you know. And you know, it just, of course it doesn't work like that, you know. And so I kind of went in and had to find a way of getting to know them, getting to know the personalities, the workings of the place, the feel of the place, and try and create some art that worked around them and somehow reflected them. So what was very generous was that people did lots of interviews with us. Lots and lots of volunteers sat down with us and, you know, gave us their time and talked extensively about their experiences, which that was really opened the doors, that people being prepared to that, both young and old. I mean, we had some, if you remember, Dan, had some great conversations with people, and it's really enlightening sort of hearing what people had to say. You know, it's really good interviews, I think, you know.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was nice to but it was also nice that, you know, you was able to capture that busyness of people working. So, there was that side to it as well. And they were, we were able to do that. As we said, it was access sort of all areas. So
all areas,
we could capture that. That was nice.
No, and I think, it's interesting there's a reflection there, because it's sort of, it's always been a continuously working railway, and that was a nice sort of tradition to sort of hook into the fact that that's never stopped. When they took the railway over, the SKLR, and I think it was 69, when the mill closed down the railway and went over to road transport, they were closed for a very short period of time to lay track and stuff, and then they were up and running that same sort of season. They had trains on the line, the SKLR. So, and since then it's run more or less continuously, apart from when there was a brief sort of hiatus due to some sort of differences with people who own various properties and things. But thankfully all that got resolved very quickly, mainly because there's such good feelings towards the thing. But so coming in and refocusing my work, which is what I had to sort of do and really rethink. The sort of, I think it's that combination of talking to people. I realised that we would have to spend a lot of time there, and I mean, you were very generous with your time as well, Daniel, which was great. I mean, we were there practically every day we could get in, weren't we? I mean, it wasn't just like a handful of visits. We were living there for a while.
It was amazing. I think it's one of those things, when I look back, I can't believe how much time we did spend, but it was just such a great environment. You didn't even feel like you were spending that sort of time now. I think it was just a great thing to do, and it was one of those things you just couldn't miss out on. The option was there, so I was glad to go along, and it was what I'd always hoped from the project. But of course you don't know that until I started working with you and the railway. So and
it's it, like I said, it's one of those things where you actually, to use that horrible word, you have to sort of embed yourself with the volunteers in the railway and really sort of get inside. And I remember you pointed out, Daniel, at some stage that the way we kind of fitted in down there was actually we were there doing our work and people were there doing their work, and the two things were sort of running together, and suddenly this kind of assembling artwork, gathering material and stuff like that was sort of part of the whole sort of railway, really. So everything that was happening was sort of generating material and stuff, and this, gradually, I think, instead of, because I remember when, first going there, it's kind of like, you're an alien and it's your first day on a new planet, and of course all the inhabitants sort of look at you. People are friendly, but they kind of go like, oh, who's this and I remember on the first few weeks I was there, I'd be creeping along, and when I was on BRFM before, I was talking about my microphone. I've got like this an outdoor recording microphone, so it's in this big thing that's shaped, called a blimp. It's shaped like a big sort of rounded cylinder, like a Zeppelin, if you know, that sort of airship shape. And it's covered in this woolly thing called a dead cat. So it actually looks like I'm holding up some sort of deceased animal in my hands, And I remember creeping around some of the carriages doing some recording. And on the other side would be a volunteer, and they'd literally leap into the air with terror when they saw this thing coming. And but gradually it got to the point where people would come up and stroke my microphone and try and bring it back to life. So we all became friends, and I think from that point, when very quickly after a month or so, we were kind of very accepted and bedded in, and we could just go anywhere and do anything. And it was really that was the sort of basis of getting the material, the voices of the volunteers, and the sort of the sounds, because it's a sound piece, and there's probably few areas you could go with such a diversity of sounds. You've got the nature and the mechanics and the workings and all the sort of track, and then all the surrounding environments of the mill, and it's an absolutely, it's just kind of like a great big ice cream parlour of sound.
We are at the moment talking to Jim, and of course Jim is one of 3 sound artists who took part in our project Art Transmission. And as it comes towards the end, we're just catching up with Jim and sort of reflecting back on the project, and especially Jim's part as well. Of course, Jim worked with the Sittingbourne and Kemsey Light Rail, and I think we're going to try and talk a little bit about some of those memorable moments, or almost favourite moments.
Favourable moments? There are so many, I remember. It's really hard to choose, Daniel. I mean, the The most obvious one, I suppose, would be it's something everyone finds a favourite sound, and that's when you stand beside the track, as you can do if you go to Milton Park down there. There's those memorable gates that I remember we tapped and got some lovely sounds out of. Well worth a tap if you're down in the park. Oops. And just that sound of a train far off, you suddenly kind of hear this strange kind of hissy distant noise. You're hearing something, it's against this background sound of the traffic and the birds and the wind maybe, and then suddenly it's quite definitive. And it's odd the way the sound of a train will carry on the wind. Sometimes it moves towards you before you see the train, sometimes it's moving the other way. The sound seems very physical. It can be caught and carried by the wind, and then gradually this kind of hissing comes up, and then it races towards you, like sort of just with such rapidity. It seems to take forever to get close, and then once it's sort of within striking distance, this sound and the volume and the energy and the sheer power, just this beautiful mix of sounds of this huffing puffing thing. And to me it has this sort of human sound, a train. It reminds me of probably an athlete with asthma, on like a really hot day, running up a really steep hill, but with such power and sort of determinacy. I'm not going to stop, and this sort of, you get all this kind of little engine that could sort of thing happening. And then the sound just passes in an instant, this huge roaring and rattling and engine noise, and then recedes just as quickly into the distance. And that whole sequence of sounds, I think, has to be experienced. If you've never actually experienced a real steam train going past, it's unforgettable. And I think once you've heard that sound, there's just something unforgettable about it. It's one of those sort of sounds that will always remain with you. Have I got another favourite sound? Oh, let me just think. Well, there's also down at the SKLR, for day-to-day work, they don't use the steam engines, because it's quite a procedure, firing up a steam engine, as we talked about before, and just takes quite a bit of time, and then letting them cool down. So for day-to-day work, and these are talking about the Wednesdays, the working days, they use the diesel trains, and I did a lot of recording of diesel trains. And when I'm recording, I'll start off recording from a distance, but it's a bit like if you're a filmmaker. You sort of start off doing your, traditionally, you start off doing your establishing shot, which is like a wide shot. So I'd record, stand way back and get the sound of the whole thing. But then you move in for your sort of close-ups with a microphone. And just like moving a microphone half an inch this way or that, you suddenly tease out these strange ticking sounds. Then you move half an inch and suddenly you've got this kind of thrumming sounds. And just even something like a diesel, it's just like packed with, hundreds of different sounds. And these are kind of the really, I think the engines are the most memorable things to me. But then again, you've got the other side of that, the other end of the spectrum was the days that Bob at the SKLR would open the gates and we could wander off up Milton Creek, and you go past the mill and you're suddenly into the sort of silence of the area and the wildlife and the birds, and it's a tidal creek if you go down there, and the way the water moves and laps, and amongst all this sort of old debris of industrial docks and things they had there, because that's where they used to bring in the sort of paper and stuff, and that's away from all the machines. That's another sort of sound of the railway and its environment and stuff. And again, it's sort of so peaceful and haunting and gentle an area, and it's fascinating to have these two types of sound in such close proximity.
Yeah, and I suppose I was gonna say one of the bits I most remembered being down at the railway was when we went down and did some sleeper tapping. Sleeper tapping,
oh God, I could tap sleepers all night, mate.
No, it was a real sort of special moment, and I think what was nice, it was one of those days where the railway wasn't running and the track crew weren't doing any repairs, and we was able to put our orange jackets on and just go a little way down the track. And,
we went most of the way down the track. We went up to the viaduct.
Well, yeah, we got that far.
And we were told we must never tell anybody that we went up on the viaduct. It's absolutely forbidden if you're not a viaduct worker, But we were kind of given, we were sort of given permission to go up there as long as we never ever mention it. And, I'm never going to tell anybody that we went up on the viaduct. I promise you, I'll keep my word.
But no, it was a good experience to do.
It's beautiful, and I think the other thing is that it kind of takes you into this area, which is this kind of almost frozen space of a railway when there's no trains running, and you've just got the tracks, and that very sort of special environment. That's a sort of railway track. I mean, and it's another thing about, it provides this kind of environment for our old friends, the fauna and the flora, all the animals and plants that live down there, and as well all the other sort of industrial sounds. And there's something between sort of silence and overwhelming noise down there, and it creates this absolutely, I don't know, it's just a sort of magical atmosphere, really. And I can see the attraction of just wandering up and down railway lines, and it's, again, Daniel, for people like us who don't probably never do that, I mean, I don't know if you misbehaved as a child and ran onto the old railway track, but very dangerous thing to do, and no wonder it's kind of considered incredibly silly. But to be able to wander up a railway track, first time in my life, just unforgettable.
Yeah, it's the first time I'd ever done that. So, and you allowed us to sort of see it in a different light. Because sometimes when you're on the train, you're moving along, you're enjoying the experience of the train, and this was seeing it in a whole new way, and seeing what the track crew had done, where they'd done their repairs and things like that. So you could see the bits of completely new sleepers to the old ones, and there was some waiting there to be replaced. So you could see all that kind of side of it up close.
Yeah, I mean, would you consider yourself a sleeper tapper expert now after that day?
I don't know about that, but actually it was surprising though. You could hear the difference, so that surprised me, between the sort of the ones that were ready to be replaced to those new ones. We could find the different sounds.
The thing is, I suppose the difference is, because we're not experts, we would tap a few sleepers, and sleepers, they live in the ground for 30 years, and they're kind of treated with heaven knows what chemicals, but to keep them from rotting. But over time they do. Insects make homes in them, and the damp gets in and they rot away. But if you're not an expert, you might go along and tap these things and go, well, that one doesn't sound so good. But it's hard to know exactly that point when it needs to be replaced. And I'll bet you anything, these experts come along, experts are like, and they know their stuff. They come along, they tap, and they go, ooh, that sleeper's been in the ground 27 years, 3 months, 9 days, 4 hours and 7 minutes, and then they'll tap the next one and they go, oh, that sleeper's been lying in the ground for 16 years, 7 months, 18 minutes, and it's that sort of expertise that you can only sit back and admire.
And Jim, I know you next want to talk a little bit about observations and your observations into the sort of railway, and your sort of viewpoint from that perspective.
Well, I'd just like to... There's so many aspects, again, just as there's so many sides to the railway, Daniel. And I think one thing I'd really like to highlight here is to do with the history of the railway. And it's probably like a part of it that we don't really see, but it's... what I'm talking about here is literacy and the growth of literacy. And this is what strikes me as what they're keeping alive at the SKLR. They're honouring this history, because the thing with the SKLR and that, it's obviously really important as a piece of living industrial history for the area, because the SKLR doesn't function as a usual sort of museum piece. What we've got there are living, breathing trains, functioning trains. So, for instance, you might go to a museum and they've got this kind of, antique railway there, an antique locomotive there that from, 1893, which hasn't been on a track since 1929 or something. I mean, it's fabulous to go and look at this wonderful old machine, but how much more fabulous to come to a place where these trains are running up and down the track, and sort of in being there and, embedding myself and getting to know the sort of project, and finding out about the history. One thing that was clear was that there's this paper mill, and the whole purpose was to feed this sort of burgeoning, this expanding newspaper market in London. And it was really a time in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, when people were starting to read newspapers en masse, and they were printing out these things called penny dreadfuls. And that's really what founded the sort of the fortunes of the Sittingbourne paper mill, because up to that time they'd been producing, I think, paper in Bow in London, area in London, and they needed to expand just because more and more people were learning to read. It was quite amazing, and this literacy was sort of spreading, and London was a kind of hotbed of this. And this is what I sort of love about that sort of connection, that we've got this living in this area. There's this living sort of monument, living, breathing trains functioning to this kind of wonderful history where all this paper was brought in. And originally they were using the creek to bring in all the pulp and raw materials and shipping all that up to the mill and down to Sittingbourne. And such was the expansion, by as you get into the sort of 20th century, they suddenly decided we need to up this thing, newspaper circulation's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, moving from the hundreds and thousands up into the millions. And the only way to kind of meet the demand and keep this sort of whole thing flowing was to build this sort of railway. So, sort of looking into that, I think that it's that continuity that's, for me, that's in the sort of project, with the sort of history and honouring that sort of history and that sort of growth, and keeping that sort of local identity preserved and alive. I think it's an absolute, it's that kind of gem set in the middle of the Swale area, really.
Yeah, certainly an amazing railway to visit, and sometimes it's hard to believe, it ever worked in that context. I think sometimes because it's. It is that kind of industrial tourist attraction, and people come to see the trains and they're marvellous things to watch. It's hard to believe at one time they were just there to do a job, really, and yet they're such amazing engines, but they were not ever built for that, if you see what I mean. They were never built as a tourist attraction. They were built to do a job for the mill. And
I think that that's sort of reflected in the volunteers we spoke to who work on the carriages, Daniel, because they had this practice there at the mill, as they told us about, that they sort of started to build carriages to transport their workers around, just as the workforce increased and increased. So you could hop on at Sittingbourne and travel up to Kemsley, and then on up to the port further on, which no longer exists, because half the railway disappeared when it was closed down, on the actual sort of edge there. And one of the sort of things about this sort of this wonderful sort of movement of machines, that sort of thing, is that when I've spoken to people in the area who were still around, who are old enough to remember these trains running, they love watching these trains or hearing these trains, seeing all this kind of wonderful steam machines rolling past. This is going on into, I suppose, the late 1960s. There's still these kind of trains running up and down, and it just shows you how well built they are. There's kind of, they've been functioning for like best part of 70 years or 60 years, these things. But that kind of fascination that people had with these things, wow, look at that train and the sound of this thing running past. And now you've still got that continuity of visitors today. They come along and they see the trains, and there's still that same magic and a sort of fascination. So there's something in there that's probably kind of, it's hard to describe that sort of fascination in words. I think it's just something you have to come and experience, and it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think there's an undeniable beauty about that, and that's the thing for me, this sort of that the SKLR are keeping this thing alive and keeping it living and sort of breathing, and it's one of the very best ways to sort of explore history is jumping on one of those trains and travelling up and down that line and visiting the site. It's just really, really a wonderful way to spend a day.
Talking to Jim, our sound artist for Art Transmission, who worked with the Sittingbourne and Kemsley Railway, and I think we're going to sort of talk a little bit about some of the afterthoughts on the project.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd have to say, Dan, I started coming down to the railway in December, and it was raining, and it was raining, and it was raining. So my first deep thoughts on the project was to get more waterproof clothing and a proper waterproof cover for my microphone. I did get an actual big plastic sort of thing to put my mic in, but then unfortunately I went on to, one day I was down here recording, and one of the engineers, Joel, said, go into the firebox. There's a lovely sound there. And there was this crackling sound. The fire was just dying down. The train was going to sleep, but it carries on making these sounds for a couple of hours. And I sort of stuck my microphone in, and the end of it started to melt. It was so hot. So that was another thing I decided after the project. But I'm just sort of being a bit silly there. No, what I'd really like to say here is, looking at this project, like the railway project, the one I was involved in, but also Jane's boxing project and Kate's horticultural project, is that it strikes me there's a real sort of diversity of community groups down here, very active sort of groups. Like, it's a very active area with lots of people getting involved and doing things locally, and all these projects are very dynamic projects, very involved projects that people are committing their sort of time and energy to, and in this kind of relatively small area, it's sort of amazing to sort of see all this kind of wonderful activity going on. And further to that, it's like all these projects just kind of open the doors to visiting artists, and there was a lot of sort of trust involved, and a lot of we were just made to feel so welcome to sort of come in, and that that's a kind of lingering feeling for me. I think that like all of us were really sort of welcomed by the sort of local community, and my real sort of final thought is that that BRFM does more, that sort of gets out there, can hopefully, and Laura and Louise and yourself can engage some more sound artists. I think it's such a great way of communicating what's happening in the area through sound, and do something similar again. Get some sound artists down here, and hopefully, because radio is such a great medium for delivering this work, and it's just kind of we've also got this thing of which we'll talk about in a minute, I think, Daniel, is I think these projects have legs, because the idea is that we're going to be rebroadcasting with BRFM's kind permission some of these works on a radio station in London, Resonance Radio, which is quite a sort of wide national reach as an arts radio station. So these projects as sound projects, they've got a longevity, and they can reach out and extend far beyond the original communities where they're sort of created.
Yeah, hopefully that will be the case. And it's certainly been nice for me, because it's almost opened me up and BRFM to these community groups in a whole new way, and shown what can be done on radio and how we can work with groups. Because after all, we're a radio station, but we're also a community group like all the other groups here. In Swale, we're all all volunteers and all work in a project that we enjoy. So it's hopefully brought us in on that level. I certainly feel it's achieved that.
Yeah, and I think I hope it's an enjoyable process. I mean, I think when you're producing sort of sound art and things, I think all three of us, if I can speak for Jane and Kate as well, the last thing we want to do is come in and impose an idea on any of these groups. And I think what we've all done is come in and sat down there and just accepted the fact you've got to sit down, shut up and listen and wait and find out what's going on. And as a sound artist, it's an incredible learning experience. You just learn so much about what goes on in the area, and experience so many sort of interesting, unique, amazing experiences, and go away and hopefully just try and reflect some of the sort of magic and energy and devotion that goes into making these community projects happen, and sort of widen it out into a sort of artistic sphere. And I think I just think it's sort of really the two things feed off each other in such a sort of nice way. And they're experimental projects, so I think you're always going to get that mixture of success and failure, but what you do find is that there's a learning process going on, and that's the key thing there. It's not really about whether it's the most sort of wonderful representation of things, or that this doesn't work. It's actually doing it and working together and being there. And I think as we were just saying before, Daniel, that was the key thing about actually being allowed to say into the SKLR, becoming part of that community on our own terms, doing sound artwork, within a railway station. It's kind of a railway project. It's just quite beautiful.
I think we're just going to look at some of the events that the SKLR have got coming up.
Yeah, I thought it'd be nice just to sort of mention some of the Sittingbourne and Kemsley light railway events they've got. Now, if you fancy a ride on a steam train or a diesel, the SKLR, I've got their last event of the current season, and this is their gala weekend, so it's a very special weekend, and that's happening on the 27th and the 28th of September. And if you get down there to Sittingbourne, you can catch the trains, and they'll be running from 11 a.m. in the morning up until 4 p.m. for your last train back. And also down on the site, there's going to be rather a special steamroller, isn't there, Daniel? Do you know about that?
Yes, yeah, quite a special roller.
Can you remember what it's called?
Is it Rhoda the Roller?
Rhoda the Roller, yeah. And that's Liz and Michael from the SKLR, and I imagine with John's help as well. And from what I understand, they went on a special charity fundraising trip earlier in the year, in June. Daniel, do you know about that?
Yeah, it was quite amazing. They went from Land's End right across to John O'Groats, and they did it
John
over...
O'Groats, that's a long way.
Yeah. They did it over a fair few weeks, I think. But it was quite nice, actually, because I think they set up a Facebook page. You could actually follow their progress as they went through, and they took loads of photos. And again, that is actually still there, I think. So you can have a look at that and find out all about the roller and the progress it took on all the photos they took.
Yeah, and that was all for a very, very good cause. And I think there's also there's a sort of Just Giving website, so it's well worth checking out the adventures of Rhoda the Roller, so you can look back and see how they got on that journey. But if you'd like to see this wonderful antique roller, it's going to be on site at Kemsley Down, on the Kemsley Down site, so get down there for the gala weekend if you can. Now there's something else, Daniel. Can I mention another couple of things for the SKLR?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
'Cause it's always nice to put this information out. Now there's an SOS at the moment. Now Daniel sent me a very upsetting email some time ago, and it was upsetting because it mentioned that some rather insane locals had broken into the Sittingbourne site, and they actually burnt down the ticket office at the SKLR, and damaged fences, and generally had a sort of vandals night out, which doesn't speak much of being too intelligent, seeing as there's a lovely community railway there. Anyway, I think what they really need at the moment down at the SKLR is, what they'd love to see happen is for that Sittingbourne site to be really sort of made over and made secure, and really put on the map as a working sort of station with access for disabled, and places to sit, and flower beds and all the rest. So what they're trying to do is raise some money, trying to raise £75,000. So they've got a campaign running, and it'd be great if you could go and have a peek. There's a website here, which is, I'll read out, www.justgiving.com/SKLR. And if you can get and have a look, there'll be links on that from the SKLR website as well, Daniel. And do you know the details for that?
Yeah, it's www.sklr.net, and that's standing for Sittingbourne and Kemsley Light Railway.
Okay, and you can always phone up. There's a number there. If you look on the website, there's a phone number to phone up. And the last thing I'd like to mention has to do with Daniel. Have you ever heard of a certain man who dresses in red and has a white beard?
Yeah, I think you're going to mention the Santa Specials, aren't you, Jim?
I am indeed. The Santa Specials. Now, traditionally, Santa Specials take place in the middle of June in blazing summer. Now, hang on a sec. What am I saying? You fool. No, of course, Santa Specials happen in December at Christmas time. We all know that. And the wonderful thing is, the SKLR are taking bookings right now in September. The booking office is open, and these are heavily subscribed, and it's a wonderful family event. You've been on the Santa Specials, Daniel?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that's where our part or your part of the project started, because I think we went on the Sand Specials towards the sort of end as an introduction to the railway for you. That
was my first ever ride on a steam railway. Unforgettable, absolutely beautiful. And the Santa Specials, they run all the way through December, and I recommend them to all children of the age of 60 and younger.
So we're continuing to talk to Jim, our first of 3 sound artists to work on our project Art Transmission, as it's now coming to an end. We thought we'd catch up with one of the sound artists, and we called up with Jim to just look back on his part of the project, look back on the project as a whole, and perhaps talk about what's still to come before it finishes. And there's 2 things we're going to do. We're going to be airing some of the pieces of sound art on a specialist art station, which hopefully Jim's going to tell us a bit more about and how we worked with them, because they were kind of a supporting partner. But we're also going to be holding an exhibition in Rochester in a gallery, and perhaps I'll talk a bit about that. But if you could talk about that side first.
Yeah, well, it's really, like I say, this is a project with legs, and one of the supporting partners throughout the project was a London-based arts and community radio station known as Resonance FM, and they're another independent station, much like BRFM, based in London. Resonance is a station, runs 24 hours in London on 104.4 FM, and it provides great support for community organisations and arts organisations. So they have a lot of specialist art shows and community shows from local people around London. So it's very representative of that sort of crazy London mix, really. But like I say, it's a full-on sort of arts radio station. So they're always like looking for unusual sound art and trialling very unusual experiments. Recently they were up in Scotland, out in the wilds, and I understand from Sarah at the station that they recently acquired a special satellite that will enable them to go completely mobile, and they went up into Scotland to do an arts project with the community up there, and they were in these woods at the foot of Ben Nevis, I understand, broadcasting, and they had to send off to the Forestry Commission for some tree surgeons to come and chop down some of the tops of trees, so their satellite could actually connect with the satellite up in space, because the trees were blocking the signal. So for the first half day of their trial broadcast, they couldn't get a signal until the tree surgeons came. But luckily they were on hand. This being up in Scotland, the tree surgeons are very efficient, and they were out within minutes.
So they kind of specialise in what we touched upon with Arts Transmission in a while, I suppose. Yeah,
absolutely, Daniel. I mean, they like I say, they trial a lot of ideas on there. They really follow the the sort of art scene around London in all its manifestations. So it's a very vibrant community, and of course, as a community station, it's almost entirely run, just as with BRFM and most community stations, it's entirely run and supported by the enthusiasm of, or mainly run and supported by the enthusiasm of volunteers who sort of give their time sort of freely. But one of the great things about Resonance is they've got quite a strong profile now within the radio community, within the arts community in London, and they were involved with Laura and Louise in particularly the director of the station at the time, Chris Weaver, who's now in Dubai doing an arts project himself. But Chris was very kind enough to get involved, and I believe you met him in the early stages before I was invited along.
Yeah. Chris actually come down to us here at BRFM, and we met with Laura and Louise, who of course Francis Knight, who were like the sort of commissioning art organisation who worked with us to put this project in, and he come down and had a little meeting with us and sort of talked about sound art and kind of what they had done, and gave some of his experience in that initial early stage when we were sort of thinking about putting out an advert for sound artists, and also me approaching the groups I'd worked with to start this project.
Yeah, and this kind of led on to a very special day, Daniel, where the SKLR very, very kindly hosted a sort of summary event for all the sound artists involved. So Jane and Kate as well, who'd done the boxing and horticultural projects, and they laid on a special train for us for the day. And Laura and Louise helped organise this, and we had as a special guest, in fact. This is sounding very incestuous, isn't it? We had as a special guest Ed Baxter, who from Resonance, who very kindly came down and gave all the assembled guests, because we in the train was filled up with a sort of assembled audience. So inside the actual SKLR CAF, where they laid on a marvellous spread of drinks and food for everybody, Ed from Resonance very kindly came down and gave a very informative speech about sound art. Do you remember any of it, Daniel?
Yeah, bits and pieces of it, but I just wanted to say, actually, the railway, a big sort of thank you, because it was an amazing day when we went down there, and it was nice for people to come along from Ideas Test, and also the other groups we'd worked with to all come together, and the other sound artists to sort of meet up at the end of the project and capture some of it. And the railway was just amazing, because we said they opened up especially for us and laid on a train to take all our guests down, do the sort of event and speech, and then they took us all back. So it was one of the highlights. We were talking about some of the highlights of the project. I think that was one as well.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. It was a lovely evening, and I remember I met a chap from the Horticultural Society down there, and he was saying how much he enjoyed Kate's pieces and the whole process, and it was really sort of heartening to hear somebody from the community who listened in to BRFM and heard the shows and heartily approved of the finished works, and that sort of feedback's invaluable. It really sort of strengthens your feeling that you're sort of involved in a really good project with BRFM, and with the help of Resonance and Laura and Louise and everything. So yeah, it was a great event. And travelling back, Daniel, I'm not sure if this was deliberate from the SKLR. I suspect it was, but it was a lovely evening, and this normally they run to schedule. I think this is a special event. The train back must have, I think, probably local molluscs could have sort of travelled a bit faster. I mean, how long did it take us to get back? I think it took about an hour or something. Yeah,
it was a long trip back.
And it was great because the sun was going down and everyone was chatting, and it was just all very kind of memorable and very beautiful. So I throw in my thanks as well. It was really all very great.
And I thought I'd just mention, as I said, we're as well as airing these pieces on Resonance very soon. We're also going to have an exhibition at an art gallery called the Pop-Up. It's in Rochester. It's not far from Sunpier House, but on the Rochester High Street there. And basically, we're going to have some of the photography from Simon. So it's a great chance to go along and see the progress through the photographer artist of the project, but also a great chance to listen to the pieces in full in a gallery environment. And basically this exhibition is going to be on show as part of their science and technology section of the pop-up gallery. So I think basically through September and October they're going to have a series of different exhibitions, and our one will be one of those exhibitions in that period. And we're going to be open on the 25th, 26th and 27th of September, and then the 2nd, the 3rd and the 4th of October. So it'll be a great chance to go along and see the work in an exhibition space.
No, certainly. And it's good that you mention Simon Martin, the photographer who documented all the project, because he was with us all the way and took some really sort of memorable photographs of the sort of various activities going on. I mean, gorgeous pictures of the allotments, and sometimes some very unusual kind of viewpoints and really special viewpoints. And certainly when we were working with the SKLR, he took some really astonishing portraits of the members, that really brought out the sort of character, sort of very sort of close. He's a very good portraiture, Simon. So I think if you're in the area, it's really get down to the pop-up gallery if you can, and check out the photographs, and as well the sound works. Something else I'd like to say, Daniel, is that this Saturday Resonance is also hosting a special event for us as a sort of kick-off to rebroadcasting all these shows that have been sort of premiered on BRFM. So what time's that happening, Daniel, on Saturday?
Is it around about 2 o'clock, I think?
2 o'clock on Resonance. So anyone who's interested, if you find Resonance 104.4 FM on the web, they obviously their stream is online. They've got a very good strong stream, so you'll be able to hear the wonderful Daniel here broadcasting live from London, which we're all really looking forward to. And Laura and Louise from Arts Transmission will be down as well, and Jane Pitt. I think unfortunately Kate can't make it, is that right? No,
I don't think Kate's going to be able to make it, but hopefully Simon will be there as well, so that'll be a real sort of roundup of the project.
Yeah, so it'll be a real get together, and who knows, we might end up having a massive fight in the studio, an art fight.
And Jill, I must say it's been good to have you back, actually, and look back at that part of the project.
Yeah, well, it's always lovely to come back up here, Daniel. And I mean, as you were saying earlier, a vital part of the project is the fact that BRFM has sort of stood up and acted as a sort of gallery, as you put it, for these sound art projects, and certainly one of the most for me enjoyable parts of the whole project has been driving up Oak Lane, picking our way. The first time we picked our way through, it was in January in the darkness. It was freezing cold. Outside was a sea of mud, and we were trying to find our way. And then suddenly, gleaming up there ahead of us, illuminated, was the BRFM aerial, which is certainly a landmark around here. And the one thing I regretted coming up was when you described that you were on the edge of a cliff. I didn't realise that you can just go and stand at the end of the edge of the station grounds and see the sea. But of course, being winter, by the time we got up here for an evening interview, it was pitch black, and it's probably just as well I didn't wander too far over, because I'm not very good when it comes to falling off cliffs and surviving. And but then it's when we came back here, I think, when was it, in June we came back to chat?
Yeah, it must have been, yeah.
Yeah, when you're just airing the projects, you're still just about to air Kate's projects, I think. So I came back here with Mary, who's very kindly driven me up, because my driving skills are next to non-existent, and we finally got to see the view from out here, Daniel, which is quite fantastic. So, as well as working with this wonderful community group and all the great people down there, Bob and Liz and John, and innumerable people have been so kind, there's this added thing of coming up to BRFM, and that whole experience. It's quite atmospheric coming out to the island, and for me, sheppey's a very, very special place. It's just, coming from London, it's so different. And as we were chatting earlier, it's so close to London, and yet in some ways for me it's like stepping into another world. It's got its own unique atmosphere, and it's just I hope I can come again. What can I say? And thanks everyone for listening. I hope you've enjoyed some of the sound works that Kate and Jane and myself have produced. I know we've all really just grown, really, from these wonderful experiences. So, Daniel, thank you so much on behalf of all of us, for letting us partake of this wonderful project.
Thank you. It's been an enjoyable experience. That is Jim, our first of three sound artists, all as part of our project Art Transmission. A little bit of a look back, and of course letting you know about those two things we're going to be doing very, very shortly as well, which of course is our opportunity to air some of our pieces on Resonance at an art station in London, and also our exhibition we're going to be holding at the Pop-Up Gallery in Rochester, and you'll have opportunity to see all the photographs and hear the pieces of sound art there on the 25th, 26th and 27th of September, and the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of October. And what we'll probably do is put more information on the blog and Facebook page very, very shortly as well, and on the Art Transmission website.